It is episode number 9, right after Dan Huff is
he's the opener.
I'm so pumped to have RJ Ronquillo as episode 9. This is a lot of fun for me, not just because he's the first guest where we can really talk about tattoos that I've had, but I've been following his channel for a long time. And what's funny was when I was starting session solos, I told this to Michael Nielsen, but there were a few like YouTube channels. I had put the guitar down for a while. You know, it was like life happens, and I don't know how old it was. Maybe RJ can refresh my memory, but there was one where you were messing with plugins trying to get a tri-stereo chorus sound.
Yep.
And I was like, who is this guy? I had the refrigerator that did all these things that I sold in 1996 for pennies on the dollar. But, you know, and so I thought it was cool that there was somebody else, at least in my age range, that was really interested in this stuff. And so then I started to dig in more, and I was like, oh, wow, he's a pro, not just a pro YouTuber, but he's been on tour with a whole bunch of massive names and done a lot of fantastic work. And so I've been on the RJ fan club now for years, and I knew when I started doing the interviews that I had to get RJ on. So I can't thank you enough, my friend. I'm glad we were finally able to get a time and do this. I'm super pumped. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind words. I think I'm doing good. And it's funny you mentioned that video, and I guess it was one of the more popular videos on my channel, but I feel like that I did that during COVID when, you know, we had lots of time to think and get into things. And I really don't know, you know, it's probably me and Mason Marangella from Vertex would be texting all about, you know, rack gear and Dan Huff and stuff like that. And it just, you know, I went through so many deep dive rabbit holes on music during that, you know, those early COVID years. And I just started getting more into the late 80s, early 90s pop rock stuff and like the LA session guys. And then I started discovering, you know, other people on YouTube and Instagram that were into the same stuff as well. And you know, just started like this little circle of fandom for all that stuff.
I was going to ask you how you got into that, but let's start at the very beginning. So you're originally from Detroit, fellow Midwest guy.
Yeah. Where are you?
Cool. I'm in Omaha.
Oh, great.
I saw your Detroit Tigers tattoo, and I, you know, as a Texas Rangers fan, I know what it's like having anguish and then it finally get released. So tell me about when you picked up a guitar for the first time. Were you in a musical household? Like, was it, I know I read this about you that you started playing because of the Back to the Future movie, which has such symmetry with me, except it was more his band, the Pinheads, with Huey Lewis as the judge, that got me into it as much as the Chuck Berry thing. But anyway, tell me about how music began for RJ.
Yeah, I did grow up in a fairly musical household. I'm Filipino, and it's very common for Filipino families to have some sort of music in their lives, whether like someone's a singer or someone plays an instrument. And my dad is a physician by trade, but he was the musician in his family. He came from like a huge family. I want to say 7 siblings or something. And he was the only guy in his family that was really the musician. He started playing with saxophone, guitar, piano, drums, singing. So growing up, we always had a piano. We always had guitars laying around, bongos, stuff like that. So it was only a matter of time, you know, that I would actually start playing around with the instruments. I think I started with piano lessons. My parents kind of forced me and my older sister to take piano lessons, which I think, you know, looking back, is probably the best first instrument to get into, just because it gives you the layout of the land. Like, you can visually see all the notes, and you have the basic information as far as harmony and rhythm and all that stuff. So I think that was a great first instrument. I think later on I probably switched to like drums when I was 8 years old, and then guitar didn't land until 9 or 10 or whenever Back to the Future came out. So I'm an 80s kid and a 90s teen. So if you think about all the music that came out in the 80s and 90s and the way pop culture, exploded in that time, that's kind of where all of my musical influences and background come from, really, that time period.
Was it one of those where you saw Back to the Future in the theater and ran out and was like, I got to get a guitar right now?
First, it was the skateboard. So I got into skateboarding first, and then guitar was a little bit later. I mean, it kind of happened, around the same time where I was getting into skateboarding and guitar at the same time. Yeah. But at one point, I put down the skateboard and just focused on guitar.
Tell me about your guitar journey. So now you're in on guitar. Back to the Future's come out. You're rock, like things are going. Was it an instrument? I love to ask guitarists this, especially ones that are 20 times better than me on the instrument, like yourself. Were you? I asked Dan this too, and everybody else. Were you a theory person, or were you an ear person, or because I started with piano too, where it was a little bit of both. Like the musical style, the Yamaha theory was to do it by ear and then match that with the notes, at least at the time I was taking it in the 80s. But it was like, was it the same way with you? Were you an ear player and then you learned theory, or was it more theory first, matching the ear type thing?
So very, very early on, probably while I was taking piano lessons, I probably started noodling around on the guitar and just figuring things out by ear. Mm-hmm. I remember there was the Bruce Springsteen song, Fire, not I'm on Fire, but Fire.
Oh yeah.
Which I think was a cover or someone redid that too, but it was just like two chords. And I just kind of like figured out how to bar strings to make that sound like dun 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 dun. Like I don't even know what chords they were, and I figured that out on my own. I was probably like seven or 8. So at that time, my parents must have seen that I took an interest in guitar, so they went to like Kmart and bought like a really cheap student acoustic guitar.
Sure.
Came with like a booklet of like, basic open chords, campfire chords. And I like kind of just breezed through that in a day. And then at some point we decided that I wanted to take proper guitar lessons at the local music store. I think I had some classmates that were taking lessons there too, so I had heard about it. So they signed me up at this local music store in Detroit, and that's when I started getting formal lessons of like, what are the notes on the first string, second string, the Mel Bay Blue Book, which other folk know about. That was what I went through, so I learned at least the notes and chords and simple songs, and then eventually it got into like learning the blues scale and then learning some pop songs. So really it started... like my formal training really started like very Mr. Miyagi, where I was learning the theory and not the cool stuff. The cool stuff didn't really happen until like 6 months later, a year later, where I started learning like Beatles songs or like a blues lick and stuff. So it was very, like I call it the Mr. Miyagi Karate Kid thing, where you're learning the stupid stuff and then you figure,
yeah. So what were you kind of following that path of in high school, I'm going to join bands, and was that kind of the way that went?
Yeah. I mean, starting probably in 6th grade, me and one of my best friends, who I'm still like best friends with now, just started forming bands with whoever. He played bass and he was from a musical family as well. And we would just find drummers in town to play with. And we probably had like 4 or 5 bands from 6th grade through high school. So, and just covers. We didn't write our own music necessarily unless it was for like a joke band, like a comedy thing. But it was mostly covers and just for having fun. We weren't serious about it. But we did some, interesting shows and gigs. But, at some point I got really into studying jazz and fusion and shredding and all that stuff. That happened probably around 8th grade, freshman year of high school.
What I think's so cool, and we'll get into some of this, but it's not just the artists that you played with, but I love all your influences, because I know you've talked in the past about kind of the 50s thing and really liking that, but then talking about pop culture exploding and having the whole 80s, 90s thing, and you're talking about jazz and fusion, and it's like, you're a very well-rounded guitarist, and I think sometimes we as guitarists get trapped. I like this, and this, and I'm going to play that, and we miss out on learning some of the other stuff, so I think that's cool. How did you go from the high school bands to thinking, I'm going to make this a career? What was it thinking about college or beyond all that?
Even in high school, I wasn't, completely sold on being, a musician as my career. I mean, that would have been a dream,
Yeah.
And it was really more like I wanted to be in a band. Like that was my dream. I didn't really consider being a sideman or a studio guitarist because I didn't even know those existed at that time. Yeah. I didn't know who Dan Huff or Mike Landau were in high school. But in college, so I went to the University of Miami to study jazz guitar, and that's when I started kind of discovering the other avenues of being a professional musician, whether you wanted to go back to school to teach or be a studio guy, a touring guy. And that's when I started hearing about guys like Mike Landau and the studio guys. So probably at some point in college, I was like, well, spending all this money on a college education, I might as well go for it. And, after graduation, do whatever I can to pursue this so-called career in music, whatever it was. And I started after college, I probably started playing in cover bands and wedding bands. And really it was all about meeting a ton of people where I was, which was Miami, South Florida, and just working the scenes in all the different circles. And eventually, and I always tell people, you really have to meet as many people as possible, whether, you're playing a lowly bar band gig or whatever, because those can always open new doors and meet other people that will eventually, hopefully, get you to bigger gigs and touring things and session work. At least that's what, at the time. I don't know if that works nowadays, because it's obviously totally different with like social media and the music industry now, but at the time when I was doing it, like early 2000s, I would say, that's the way the business worked.
Let me put a pause in your story, college, Miami, and playing the different scenes. When you first picked up the guitar, and then, so it's kind of a three-parter, but like when you first picked up the guitar to that 6th, 7th, 8th grade time period to college, and you're discovering these new guys, who were your guitar influences along the way? Because when I ask this question to people, they think about the first people, and like for me, it was Hendrix, and I grew up in Dallas, so Steve Ray Vaughan and guys like that. But it was, and I told Dan this, and I've told other people this, it was hearing that on the radio all the time on the way to school or a sporting event or a babysitter's house or something, of hearing who's playing the solo on this Cher song. So it's like it started here and then it moved here. And then when I got into high school, it's like, oh, I found out about this. So can you kind of track, has it stayed the same or has it been different? Like, who is RJ's biggest guitar influences over your guitar playing career? If you're like me, you can list 700.
I can give you the lineage of how it kind of went. It went kind of like Chuck Berry, Eric Clapton, Hendrix. And then at that time, like Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, Steve Vai, Yngwie.
Yep.
And then probably after that was more into like jazz and jazz fusion. So, like Scott Henderson, Frank Gambale, Pat Metheny, like those. Like I would have little pockets of like, I'm into these genres, these are the players. And then, interestingly enough, one of my biggest influences that started probably early high school was Andy Timmons, because I went to a guitar camp in Connecticut called National Guitar Summer Workshop. I don't think they do this anymore, but the first year I was there, Andy Timmons was was one of the guest artists that would come, and like clinician type of thing, and he actually came into. I was taking a jazz guitar class there. and he came into our class, and I'm like, who is this, hairband guy, long hair with the Ibanez coming in? And he was like shredding jazz, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know you could do that. So he was like the first guy that proved to me that you could be like this awesome metal guitar player, rock guitar player, but still have like a jazz back, like knowledge and sensibility, and kind of combine those with his playing. And I used to have a bootleg of his performance, which I actually did find someone did another bootleg, and it's on YouTube. I have to find the link, but I remember every single lick because I listened to that bootleg over and over again all through high school while I was still listening to like Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and Green Day and all that stuff. So I have so many different lines going in parallel throughout my life as far as musical influences that it's kind of hard to pinpoint like I was only into this at this time or whatever. So obviously, like I said, I was into whatever's on the radio at the time, plus my nerdy guitar stuff, plus some other stuff that I, was trying to get into. So, but nowadays it's like, well, okay, so how did I get into like the LA studio guys like Luke Thurr?
Well, yeah,
and
I'd love to hear this because I'm going to segue this to a YouTube comment that you and I had an exchange on somebody else's channel this past weekend about a giant video, because this is interesting.
It wasn't, honestly, that stuff didn't come till later. I had first heard of Michael Landau in college because one of my best friends was like, I was like, who's Michael Landau? I was like, oh, that show, the Heights or whatever? Heights? Yeah. that How Do You Talk to an Angel? He does the solo in that. I'm like, oh, that's a cool solo. And I'm just like, okay, whatever.
Do you know what I found out after I covered that solo on Session Solos and tabbed it up? I had somebody reach out that I think was in the studio or knew, and he's like, no, that was actually this guy.
Who was it?
Like, hang on, and I'll tell you, not to interrupt this, but I had to go back and change everything. Bob Mann.
Okay. He's done some other stuff, too.
Yeah, correct. So that's happened a couple times where I've done my best. I mean, I'm obsessive.
We didn't have internet back then, though. That's the thing. No, we didn't have Google in 1997.
All we had was liner notes on vinyl or CD that you'd undo, and then you could read. But even those would be, sometimes it'd be super general. It's like guitar, 4 names.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait,
which part? they're not going to be, he played the bridge and the pre-chorus. That's how it is. You try to,
and I've been lucky enough. It's been fun. Like I'm covering one right now where Steve Lukather and John McCurry were both on a share thing.
Yeah.
And it's fun. One of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet is John McCurry. And it's fun to be able to ask him and go, hey, was this you or Luke? And he'll say, oh, well, I remember it. I think it was me because I remember Desmond Child humming it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like what he wanted. And so that's been fun.
I was going to say, I had that happen to me too. So a couple years ago, I did a Madonna tribute gig here in Nashville. And I was playing, I don't know which funky Madonna pop tune it was, but I had posted a video of it. And some guy said, oh, who did the original guitar part was so-and-so or whatever. And then like I guess I totally forgot that I'm friends with Paul Pesco on Instagram.
Oh,
and Paul Pesco, I wrote like, are you sure it was him? I thought it was Paul Pesco. And then Paul Pesco chimed in like, yeah, that was me. I was like mind blown. I'm like directly from his mouth.
It's cool when they remember. Rich Rankin and James Tyler put it a really good way, and I shared this with Cliff Jones too. He said it's like a surgeon, and then asking them, hey, do you remember that surgery that you did in February of 1988? They're like, no, I don't remember that.
That's amazing.
But it is weird sometimes when they can remember, and they're like, oh, I actually remember walking in that day, and then this was going on. But the reason I wanted to bring that up, and when you got to those guys, and I'll let you finish, but there was a video that somebody had posted. I think it's the channel LA Studio Guitarists, but they had posted something on MTV in 1992 with the band Giant, obviously Dan Huff and his brother David, and they're all around a pool table. And what's funny is, I remember seeing this live or whenever it first aired. I think somebody recorded it for me on a VHS. I was like 30 minutes late. We didn't have DVR, so you just got to get it. But you had such a great point. You said, it's so funny that this was airing on MTV and Nevermind had just come out by Nirvana. And my reply to you, and I was like, hey, we can talk about this soon, knowing we were going to have this conversation. But I said, I think people that didn't live during that time and read all the constant documentaries about grunge taking over for the previous scene always love to say it in like it was a gauntlet drop. In a way it was, but for the general public as we consume things, it was much more of a gradual thing. And my wife loves to remind me, as we grew up in that era, she's like, grunge didn't last very long. Like in the grand scheme of
it quickly morphed into something else.
Yeah. And so I always find it funny when we have those conversations like, oh, well, this was 92. They were still playing that on MTV. Oh, well, okay, I guess, but wasn't grunge. And it's like, yeah, things are not always so cut and dry. You know, I mean, it was gradual.
I remember, and that's why I'm kind of obsessed with that time period, let's say 90 to 92, because that was like a huge transition for pop and rock music. Yeah. Because there were still great albums from like Extreme and like Warrant coming out around that time, and Skid Row that, when someone says, oh, 91, 92, oh, that was grunge and, Smashing Pumpkins and all that stuff. But at the same time, like I remember seeing Warrant with Lynch Mob in 92, 93. Yeah. And I was just like, but I was still listening to, Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and everything. So it was it was an exciting time because you had that period of these dual, rock genres happening. But then Giant got lost in the mix. I never heard Giant until like the past 10 years. I was aware of Dan Huff. I was aware of Giant, but I'm like, and Dan, I'm sure Dan says like, well, they came out right at the wrong time. So that's why it didn't really take off. But then now you have this rediscovery of that, melodic rock AOR period.
I'd love to hear your take on this, but I started this passion project having no idea what was going to happen. But I just knew that growing up in the era that you and I did, especially when the internet came out and we're like, oh, what is this? Because we didn't have it all, our whole lives. But it was like you'd get tab and it was wrong, and then you'd learn it wrong. And a lot of those guys didn't even learn tab. And so that's a whole era of those that actually use tab. Mm-hmm. But I remember thinking, I have no idea where this is going to go, but I've always wanted to do this correctly, and put it out there. And if people want it, great. Then they don't have to spend for it or whatever. But what's interesting are the kids, like 19-year-olds and 16-year-olds and 24-year-olds discovering this music for the first time, reaching out to me going, I didn't even know this existed, or that, because they don't know about the period of hair metal into Seattle. They don't, they weren't alive. And so I'd love to know, your YouTube channel is exponentially bigger than mine, so the feedback you get is going to be greater. What are you as fascinated by it as I am in terms of, and how much do you hear young people when you're doing I want to take Luke's rack and turn it into a pedal board?
Yeah.
Like those kind of videos, how much do you hear from young musicians that are discovering it for the first time?
Yeah, I think, well, going back to that video that we were talking about that I posted about, recreating the rack stuff in plugins. Yeah. And I was shocked at how many people were interested, or like that's what they were into. And that's like, people older than us and people younger than us that were infatuated, with that sound and that vibe. So it's kind of interesting. It kind of makes me feel old too. Like because I'm trying to think of the equivalent when we were kids. Like, I'm sure we were like, oh, how did Hendrix get that fuzzy tone, octave tone? 100%. So it's kind of like that same thing. So
my first influence was listening to his entire Woodstock performance. It was two. It was Double Trouble Live with Stevie Ray Vaughan, and then it was Hendrix at Woodstock.
Yeah.
And yes, there was stuff in there like Led Zeppelin and Mountain and Skynyrd and those to Al King, and I had a lot of those influences. But those two records, it was the same way. It was me listening to one. I wasn't alive then, but I still can't make it sound like that.
Right.
And that's when I told people, like when grunge was out, I told Dan, I said, I think what you guys don't realize is I can make my practice amp sound like Nirvana. But how did you get that big, huge sound for that solo? Or how did you get, like we're talking about, the tri-stereo chorus or the pitch shift or whatever? How did you get that clean sound? Like, so yeah, it was the same way.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's the way you looked at those.
Yeah. And for me, that stuff got lost on me growing up and while I was in college and working on my career. That was stuff that I wasn't interested in back then. And at some point I just started listening more to the production of these songs and, old videos or whatever, and just kind of getting obsessed about, the clean tones and how crazy their racks were just to get that one sound that's so overly processed. But it's a thing. There's nothing like it. And that tone immediately puts you into an era where, you can't, if you put on a fuzz pedal, you could be in the 60s, you could be in the 70s, you could be in the 90s or whatever. But like that specific, heavily processed chorusy delay sound instantly puts you in a specific era, specific genre. And it's cool to see newer artists and bands utilize that and putting it to like, EDM songs or whatever, or, whatever pop stuff. So it's just cool to see something that was lost on me back then kind of make a comeback.
So you're at Miami, you're learning about who Michael Landau is and all this stuff. I don't want to skip ahead too much, but you had quite the career. I mean, you're going on tour with people like Ricky Martin. How did you go from the local scene in Miami to, hey, I'm a touring guitarist now and I'm on the road?
It all started with an ad at a music store.
Really?
Like if I can tie like almost my entire early career to, well, okay, there's two points in my life that I remember. It was an ad in a music store for just like a local rock band looking for a guitar player. And I had answered that ad. I joined this band, and I had met the people in that band who eventually introduced me to other people who introduced me to other people, and then got me into the Latin music scene in Miami. So Ricky Martin wasn't the first Latin artist that I was touring with. I actually started touring with a singer by the name of Soraya. She was from Colombia. She had passed in 2006, but she was like my first break into like the Latin music scene in Miami, which at the time, was the country music scene in Nashville. Like in Miami at the time, you had Latin, you had hip hop, and you had like Caribbean music. Like there's no rock or anything, unfortunately. But so there was that, and then there was another avenue where I was touring with a reggae band called Inner Circle, and that I got that gig because I was playing just like covers, like R&B funk covers at like Miami Heat basketball games, and like the drummer came out and was friends with our keyboard player, and they were looking for a guitar player. So at the same time, I was working two different touring parts of my life. So I was busy at one time, very busy.
An Inner Circle is the Cops theme, Bad Boys.
Yep. The Cops theme, Sweat, a la 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 long.
Isn't that cool?
They're still touring.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So you go from Inner Circle, and then what happens?
So Inner Circle was my first like real touring gig, and then Soraya, and then Ricky Martin. And at the same time I was doing all the touring stuff, I was also doing whatever session work was in town that I could do. I luckily got a Santana session because I was like cool. the fourth call or something. All the guitar players were out of town or something. So I was luckily in town this weekend or something, and and I did this session, which was cool
Do you remember
because
what it was for Santana?
yeah, it was a single. It was a song called "Why Don't You and I" that Chad Kroeger from Nickelback wrote. It was on the radio, but it was cool because I got to hear like the demo that Chad had sent the producer, and just played like the rhythm parts, and then eventually got sent to L.A. where like Lee Sklar played bass and Tim Pierce added more guitar, and of course Santana did his solo stuff. But it started very little in Miami, and then the production got bigger when it got to LA and stuff. So it was cool to see my name in the credits, but I was so stupid back then that I was like, just put my first name, don't put my last name. So like my first few major label session credits just says RJ. So I had to go on like
the guitarist formerly known as RJ.
Yeah, so I had to go on at one point like years ago. I had to go on like All Music and Discogs to say, "Hey, this is me. Can you just like tie all the RJs of this together?" So like if you go literally, if you go to like the Tupac session that I did, I also did like a session for like a Tupac record. It just says RJ. I had no idea like what my career was gonna do. I was just like, yeah, whatever. Like share.
Was there a reason that you wanted it to just be RJ? Was it just like a cool, like a share Prince thing?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I had the idea like I just wanted to be known by my first name, but also I didn't think Ronquillo was a hip name to put on credits. Like maybe I should have gotten a stage name or a pseudonym or something. From the touring and all the session work that I was doing in Miami and South Florida, after the Ricky Martin tour had ended, I wanted more, and I didn't think South Florida could offer anything bigger than that gig at the time, so I moved to LA just to do whatever you do in LA as a musician. And I did shitty gigs, I did cool gigs, but I never really got like a huge touring gig out of LA. In fact, the touring that I did while I was still in LA was still coming out.
And what year was this? You were in LA.
I moved to LA in 2008. 2008. Okay. I was trying to just do whatever, and I joined a local rock band called the Chelsea Smiles in LA. And that was really cool. That was another stepping stone where that introduced me to a whole nother world of people, including my wife. And
that's an important person.
Yeah. So even though I didn't have like, you know, the huge touring gig, like I probably had a dream, like I just want to get like a Pink tour, or, you know, whoever,
sure,
Katy Perry or something, whoever was a big artist at the time, I wanted to get on those tours, and it didn't happen. But I was getting into other stuff that I never thought I would get into, like, blues, like the West Coast blues and rockabilly stuff out there. I met Tim Pierce, getting into that circle of LA people, the baked potato hangs and all that stuff, and all that crew. So that was fun. Eventually that got tiring and expensive. So I took a Nashville touring gig, and here I am.
Wow. And how long you been in Nashville now?
10 years.
Very cool.
I don't do the touring thing anymore, but it was a great 5 years. I was touring with a married couple duo called Thompson Square, and that was probably one of the funnest gigs I've ever done. Like, I have so many good memories and so many good trips, and they took me all over I would have never thought country music would take me all over the world, but we played in Australia and Japan and Guam and Hawaii, Mexico. Our first gig was in Mexico at a resort in Cancun. It was, like a vacation. It was like a dream come true.
That's amazing. That is so cool. When did you say, because I believe it was for a guitar company, but when you were like, I'm going to do this YouTube thing, and what year was this? Because I'm curious to know, like, what did YouTube look like when you did that first video? Because obviously it's very different today than it was even 5, 6, 7 years ago.
I want to say 2010, 2011. I had, there was a guitar that I wanted, and I don't know if I couldn't find it locally, so I would have had to order it from the company. And for some reason, I had the idea, like, why don't I see if I can get a discount? Because, I've got this resume, blah, blah, blah. And I can say, you have an artist discount. and I wasn't touring at the time, I don't think, but it was Eastwood Guitars, and the model was this tuxedo, which is actually, you can't see it on screen, but it's hanging on the wall.
At any time, feel free to get up and show off your guitars.
Okay. But so this tuxedo was this, let me get it.
Yeah, grab it.
Kind of a nerdy guitar, but it's based on
I love that color.
Yeah, it's like a orange copper thing, but
it's cool.
It's based on an old Barney Kessel model, Barney Kessel was a jazz guitar player. And this one is hollow, actually. So it's almost like a jazz guitar, but it's like really small scale and whatever. But I was getting into like rockabilly and like old timey blues stuff at the time. And I wanted this guitar, and it's not a very expensive guitar, but I couldn't find it anywhere locally. So I reached out to the company and I said, can I get an artist discount? And they said, send me your tour dates and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I don't really have any right now. But I was like, well, why don't I guess I might have said, why don't I film a YouTube demo for it and maybe we'll get a discount or something. And that's how it started. And at that time, 2009-ish, I would say, I remember the only guitar players I was watching on YouTube were Pete Thorne, had some videos out, like very Eddie Van Halen-ish type videos. I think Phil X might have been doing stuff for Fred and Americana at that time. And then there were some other like blues guitarists. I think he's a Texas, Austin guy, Lance something. I forget his last name, but he did some really good videos. So there's maybe like a handful of people that were doing YouTube, demos or guitar lesson type videos. That's how it started. And I put that video on, and the company, I think, might have put it on their channel and sent it. And it just kind of, they were like, hey, this video is doing great. We sold a bunch of these or whatever. We want to send you another guitar. And that's how it all started. And at that time, I think I might have just charged, not even charging for it. I was just like, okay, cool. And then eventually I started charging for it and then charging more for it and getting more companies. And just kind of, from 2009 till now, that's how it started. But that wasn't my main gig. I was still gigging and touring up until 2018. And 2018 is when I stopped touring altogether and just doing YouTube full time.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, first of all, congratulations. I mean, I think what is so cool about what you've done is it's not always shiny and that stuff happens and you just kept going, well, I'll just go here and figure this out. I'll go here and figure this out. And I think that is, as somebody who has done other YouTube channels and worked with companies, like it takes time. And it is you have to be passionate about what you're doing, and you also have to be nimble because things can change in a heartbeat, and then you got to kind of go with this, and you got to go with this. And I think the resiliency is there's a billion things I respect about you, and like I said, I'm a massive fan of yours.
Thank you.
But I think the way you go about things, I think there's this realness to it, but also just the resiliency to go, I'm just going to keep going and keep going. And that to me is what makes YouTube really cool, is that you have to build it.
Mm-hmm.
Your subscribers on YouTube over any other platform, in my opinion, are really loyal, but it takes time. And so I think what you build is just absolutely super awesome. And not only do I wish I could play like him, he has one of the coolest James Tyler guitars I've ever seen.
Who, me?
Yes.
You know what? I put it back in the case. It's yeah, it's getting its rest. It's funny. I want another one so bad, but I need to sell off some guitars to pay for it.
I'm telling you. I told Rich, I said I have to sell a kidney this year, I think, to get one, but in the future, it's happening.
It's worth it, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a builder myself, so I know what goes into it. And so then there's that balance of making that all happen. That's why I'm obsessed with the finish. When I saw your guitar, it's like finishes to me are just as important as playability. In terms of people being drawn to it.
Yeah. It's
kind of that early video of finding the 80s cleans thing and then redoing the pedal board thing. How much use are you finding for those sounds in terms of people asking for certain things?
I occasionally do session work here in my studio. It's not a lot. 80s sound thing never gets asked for. No one asks for it for any work that I do for money. But I do use it all the time. Like, so I have a little passion project band that I started with my friends called Transatlantic Radio.
By the way, I'm subscribed on the streaming platform,
Thank
so
you.
listen, a huge fan. Yes.
We just filmed the video in Vegas and did a photo shoot, so I'm really excited for what's coming
awesome.
out. But like that is all, you know, we're influenced by so much stuff from, you know, the hairband stuff, Def Leppard, to, you know, what Dan Huff does with Giant and that whole scene, and plus like Richard Marx and Bryan Adams type stuff, pop stuff.
Yeah.
So that is like, I have to use these sounds. And to tell you the truth, all of the sounds that I use for those recordings are one plugin.
Really?
Yeah. It's called, can I talk? Well,
No, go ahead.
they're not paying me to say that, to promote them, but I'm like in love, and our good friend Michael Nielsen is part of this too, but Overloud THU is the plugin to get if you want to get instant 80 sound.
Guess who also uses Overloud THU quite often? This guy.
See? That
No, I'm serious.
it's
What I did when I was doing this channel, I had amps and pedals and just years of stuff. Obviously, my rack stuff went away a long time ago. But at a certain point, I looked around and I said, I need to simplify this. And I just want to get something that is as universal as possible. And the very first solos I did on Session Solos were all THU Overloud.
yeah.
And then I have obviously a Fractal and Axe FX 3, and I have the THU, and I have a 2x12, a couple other little things here and there. But I just downsized as much as I possibly could. And I'm with you. It is absolutely amazing what I've gotten when I just need to emulate something. I need to record something. I need to find something. And big credit to Michael Nielsen with what he did on a lot of those plugins and stuff, and rigs, as THU calls them, are just amazing. But yeah, I'm a huge fan too.
What I like about it is it's instant. Like I don't even have to like tweak anything much.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll tweak like the gain or maybe like the EQ a little bit, but like the way that Michael made the presets, you know, he has it labeled like this is, you know, Dan Huff's solo on this song and blah blah blah. Or, like I literally bought every single big hairy rig that Michael put out. Like I've spent hundreds of dollars on just his stuff.
I'm gonna put a picture. You send me yours, but I'll just scroll down and they're all there.
And I have a funny story. This happened like last week. I was so stupid. I'm stupid lately. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. That I bought the Big Racks rig pack twice because I forgot I bought it the first time. So
I've done that.
So I had to email them and say, "Yeah, I made a mistake. I already own this. Can I get like a coupon?" So yeah, I like it so much I bought it twice. So maybe that'll be my quote for Overloud. Like,
you love it so much, you'll buy it twice.
you'll buy it twice. But yeah, I mean that's all I use. And I have like a folder of favorites where I have just like my favorite sounds, clean and dirty, that get the tones that I want. And there's this one Dan Huff. It's on the Studio Aces pack.
Yep.
And there's this one Dan Huff preset that I use almost for everything.
Yeah.
So it's like perfect.
There were a number of us, me being the smallest one, but there was a number of us that were doing a guitar solo over a Sunglasses Kid music track.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
And so I jumped in and I put it out there. Then RJ's comes and I was like, holy shit.
I just have fun with it. I would do it. I would play over every single thing he puts out.
Same. So much fun. Don't even have to put it on like, you know, out there for public consumption. But yeah, and there were so many like that I heard and I was like, oh, this is just. But again, I'm glad you said that about THU, and I can say the same about Fractal. It's like there was a long time I was searching because I did get rid of all my rack stuff, and before it's gotten crazy expensive again, I'd get close with certain pedals, which is why I really loved your pedal episode, because it can get real muddied in a floor pedal format. until we've entered the day of 2024. And now there's so many cool ways to separate that and make it cool and not muddy up the chain. When these things came out, I was like, oh, that was it. That's what I was looking for. I've been missing this. And to emulate some of these solos correctly, I've got to nail this tone, or I don't know.
Yeah. But I think we're blessed that we live in a time where now that we have these great pedals that can emulate the racks and ways to configure it with like mixers, line mixers and all that stuff. So there's a way now. I mean, back then, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that might not have been the case, but now there's so many great digital pedals that, I mean, obviously I could have done the same thing and done it inside like my Helix or like, a Kemper or whatever, but it's just not the same to have like the different, choosing the actual different components to use and plug it in physically and really route it in a way.
Right.
So I thought it was a good challenge for me. Obviously, this pedal board is not getting a ton of use, just for my pleasure, really. But like at that point, I'm just using THU just so I can just turn it on and go.
Yeah, that's really cool. These are going to be kind of more high level questions, but your thoughts on, not to get you in a place where you have to say anything bad about anybody, but your thoughts on just you reviewing a shitload of gear, like guitars and everything else. Your thoughts in 2024. We went through such a wild period where we had COVID and guitar sales were the biggest they've ever been in 100 years of some of these companies. And then the used market got flooded because a bunch of people just went on vacations. They're like, I don't play guitar anymore. So all those new ones I bought are going back out on Reverb. But like everything you've seen and reviewed, what are RJ's thoughts on where gear sits today in guitars and manufacturers and pedals and effects? And you've reviewed so much. What are your thoughts? Talk, high level about the guitar industry.
I think, looking back, I think it's amazing to see how huge the guitar pedal industry has become. And I totally get it because that's, when we talk about all the different aspects of guitar gear, pedals are like the Matchbox cars where they're like, there's affordable, you can kind of collect them. They're collectible, right? And for the most part, they're affordable. So they're, people buy multiples of them. So, amps and guitars are, a little bit more expensive but it's, very typical for people just to spend tons of money on like 10 pedals, in a day or something and go crazy with them. So, I mean, most of the gear that I review is definitely pedals, and, pedals come out every week, throughout the year, which is amazing, which is great for me because that keeps me employed. But, I would have never thought that like 10 years ago, like guitar pedals would be, what puts food on my table.
And it's wild.
And
I think there's just so many good, not that there wasn't before, but there's exponentially more great guitars out there for the starter musician.
Yeah.
Like if I'm just beginning, I just remember my first guitar in comparison was not what, say, a $700 guitar would be today, or $500 or $400 or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, if we think about Squiers in the early 90s, compared to Squiers now, it's like apples and oranges. It's like amazing how they've actually made really nice guitars. Same brand, but they've just upped their quality for the same price or a lower price.
If RJ's giving tips in 2024 to somebody picking up the guitar for the first time, I always love to hear this from accomplished guitar players. How would you go about learning the guitar if you could do it all over again? If you could say, okay, maybe it is, like you said, you would still start on the piano so you could get a lay of the land. But if you were doing it all over again and you were telling somebody, hey, this is how I would start and progress and all that, well, what advice would you give?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I hate to say it, but I would probably do it the way I did it, as far as like, there's a lot of players that I knew early on that just wanted to learn songs first. So they jumped on learning tabs and songs, but they didn't really have the technique down and they didn't know anything about rhythm and keeping rhythm and beats and stuff. So, I say, like, other than playing guitar, I think it's important to also learn a little, basic way of playing the drums and playing piano. Actually, probably more so the drums, because having a sense of rhythm is super important for all musicians. Like, I think every single musician should know how to play at least a drum beat to a metronome for like 30 seconds or something,
Yeah.
But I think pick up the drums and don't jump right into like the hardest song you want because you want to learn the song. You got to start off slow and learn really the basics first. So whether it's just learning basic chords, learning how to pick, learning how, your hand position and everything. And don't be, so high tone to like jump right into the shred pool or whatever. Mr. Miyagi, just do whatever Mr. Miyagi would do. What would MM do?
Throughout your YouTube journey, what has maybe shocked you the most? Like, have you had wild comments, or like you said, people reach out to you that you're like, I think for me, and I'll just preface this and maybe it'll help jog the memory, but doing this, I always try to tag the people that were involved if they had an account on that medium, meaning if they had an Instagram account, I would try to tag them in order to give them credit. I think I'm more blown away when I've covered something and they've chimed in and I'm like, oh my God. And I wasn't intending to do that. It was more giving proper credit. Have there been moments like that for you since you started the YouTube journey where you're like, wow, this is kind of blowing me away that we're all so interconnected this way? And
in the past couple of years, just like on Instagram, I always forget that like it's public and people, high level people, celebrities are able to see it too. So occasionally, someone will start following me or send me a message, and I'm always like, wow, still kind of like in awe and kind of like starstruck that, some who followed me. Let's see. Isaac Hansen from Hansen sent me a really nice message. It's like, hey, I love your guitar playing, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh my God, I got a funny story about you guys. But like, gosh, there's so many like people that are on my friends list, my virtual friends list on Instagram that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so weird.
When you look at the future, what's on RJ's goals list as a musician, a creator, whatever?
I think for me, moving forward, I want to play music more. Meaning I want to play, whether it's gigs or maybe go back on tour or something, just play with other people more, because after a while, when you're doing the YouTube thing and you're just kind of stuck in your YouTube studio or whatever, and you're just playing to backing tracks, it does get old. And it's probably because I started playing in bands and playing with, real live people. Whereas someone younger, they grew up on the internet and they grew up with tabs and playing the backing tracks. And so most of their life is probably in front of cameras and being on social media, which I totally get, and that's cool. But for me, I think since I grew up when I did and, played with musicians, like that's the best part of being a musician and playing music is the back and forth conversations that you have when you're playing with other musicians. I think that's what music is all about to me is, it's great staying at home and practicing and getting really good, but you're missing 50% of what music's all about. And that's the connection that you make with other musicians and listeners and the audience and everything. And that's like very kind of like a spiritual thing, I guess. So I want to do more of that.
I get it. One of the things I said is I think we have this great informational thing called YouTube. And I think creators, all of us are pushed to create something constantly, right? Because it's a job. And I said this to Mark Diglio of XYZ, but I said, I think more information sometimes, anything can be a downside if you look at it that way, I think. But I said, I think sometimes if a kid is starting, I think it's more important that they learn songs and go join a band and make mistakes and fall down and do stuff and have fun together than it is going, I better know every mode or I can't play this instrument.
Yeah.
And the way we grew up was I had a cassette tape or vinyl and later a CD, and it was like rewind, try to play it, rewind, try to play it. To answer the question I asked you, if I could do it over again, I think I would take some of the theory I learned from piano and try to implement it more in the beginning of guitar so that I wasn't learning it backwards. Because a lot of what I was doing, and I heard this from Dan Huff, I heard this from Mark and John McCurry and everybody. It's like, we played, and then someone's like, do you know that is a diminished? Like, I don't know. I just played it. But having said that, I do think there was something awesome about just making mistakes and playing with other people and playing in bands and figuring it out as you go along versus feeling like I have to know all this before I can be accepted as a good musician.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, because you are more trained than I was in terms of going to school for it. I wasn't. I kind of wish I had. There's a part of me too that really appreciates the fact that, at least I guess maybe it's just the way my mind works, that I liked the ear and just kind of feeling it out and seeing where it goes.
I think I probably learned the most, and I probably made the most improvement by playing out and jamming and playing live. So when I was in my 20s, I used to play on Miami Beach like one night a week. It was this gig at a club called Jazzed, and the night or the band was called No Rehearsal, and we literally would just play for 3 hours of no songs. Someone would just come up with like a riff or a jam. So it was like I don't know if it's a jam band thing, but it was just us creating on the spot and full improvisation. And the bass player, it's an amazing bass player named Felix Pastorius, who's one of the sons of Jaco Pastorius, Felix is an amazing bass player if you want to check him out now. But he was 20 at that time, 19 maybe. Yeah. He wasn't even like legally allowed to be in the bar. But
that's amazing. And
we would just like, and I have a mini disc recording of one of the nights that we played. I should post it somewhere. But I remember like that night specifically, I would look forward to every week. Like I would be playing covers Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then I think this night was on a Tuesday. So I would be so amped to play this night on Tuesday because it was like the one time where I could not have to play cover music and just jam and be a musician. So I think about this gig, and we only did it for a couple months, but I think about this gig as being like, this is where I learned how to be a musician. You know, this is where I learned to listen to other players and react to what they're doing and test out like, you know, licks that I've, you know, never tried or whatever in a live situation in front of a audience and stuff. So it really put fire under my butt, so to speak. Just the idea of playing with no other intention other just to create right on the spot is such a great feeling.
Speaking of playing with other people, did you have a moment where you walked out into one of those gigs where you were on tour and you're like, I'm playing in front of how many people?
Yeah. I think the first night of the Ricky Martin tour that I did in 2007, I think the first night was at the arena in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. We did like 2 or 3 nights there to start it off. And it was the first time that the crowd noise was so loud before we even went on stage that like we were all in ears. And, you know, when you have sort of production, they always have like boom mics at the front of the stage so you can hear a little bit of the crowd noise so it doesn't feel like you're, you know, closed in with the in-ears.
Sure.
And it was so loud that I had to take my ears out, and then it would be loud like the ambient. So I was not safe. I had to put my ears in and then turn off my pack just so I could get away from that noise. It was so loud, and that just like, you know, gave me chills. And then think about, you know, after the first 2 nights, then it got used to it. But it was like literally every night that whole year was like that.
Do you have a favorite moment from the road, or is there anything that you look back on beyond that? Obviously, that right there is plenty. But was it wild party time with RJ, or was it in the bunk early with RJ?
For the most part, well, it's funny. Trying to think, when did I party the most? I probably partied the most with my country touring gig, Thompson Square.
Interesting.
which was like, I was already an old man at that point, There wasn't debauchery, it wasn't raucous, but for, late 30s and 40-year-olds, it was pretty, we kind of went above our limit on a lot of nights, but I don't know, that was just a lot of fun. The music was fun. The players were great. The singers, great artists. I always say that it's always a pleasure to be a sideman when like the singer is a really good singer, because you don't tire of playing the same songs over and over again because you enjoy listening to their voice. And I'm lucky to say that I've had that experience with multiple artists that I've worked with, that it's just a pleasure hearing great musicians and great singers perform, even if it's the same song.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk awesome things about your wife, but I've seen you guys head to concerts and stuff on Instagram, and I love the story that Dan told about his wife, Sherry, when they first moved to L.A. I'm assuming he was doing pinch harmonics and everything else, and she walked in the room and said, "Do you have to make that noise all the time?"
Oh my gosh.
What kind of, obviously, you guys, big support system there for you, what she meant, in your life.
She's been great. We met in LA, so we're actually both from Michigan. She's from the West Side. She's from Grand Rapids, and I'm from the Detroit area. And we met through friends in LA. Actually, when we started dating, I suddenly went on tour, which is always the case. Like I'll get into a relationship and then something pulls me to go on. I mean, I wasn't, it's funny, like that whole time I was in LA, like the first 2 or 3 years I was in LA, I was trying to get touring work, but it wasn't happening. So I'm like, okay, let me just like settle in to the LA scene and meet people and blah, blah, blah. And so I was playing in the rock band and doing whatever little gigs here and there. And then we met and started dating. And as soon as we started dating, I got a call from Miami and like, hey, you want to go on this world tour with this Latin artist named Cheyenne? I'm like, well, okay, I need the money. So like that first year, I was barely home, but we made it work. And I actually proposed to her during that tour in Spain, in Madrid, on a rowboat in the middle of the park. So that was a bonus.
Wow,
being on
RJ.
tour. Yeah. I got it.
Well,
I got points for that.
Bad. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know how anyone's gonna beat that.
Yeah, it was. I did good. I'm proud of myself.
Oh, well done.
That's how it happened.
When you were in LA, you said you got to know Tim Pierce, and I talk about those relationships with those guys and the baked potato scene and how influential. Just learning from those guys, not to always go back to the LA session guys, but that is kind of what my channel's about. So I'm curious about, that to me is like talking to some of these guys and learning from them is like my greatest education, because I think I know, and then I hear it one way. I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about it like that.
I met Tim Pierce in a kind of nerdy way. So
that's right up my alley.
So I wasn't really working as a musician that much when I had first moved to LA. So I was trying to get whatever hustle work I could get. And someone hooked me up with guitar tech work for a famous producer in LA named Rob Cavallo. Rob produced like Dookie and some Dave Matthews and a bunch of really great stuff. And he had a home studio, and he needed to hire someone that would just hang out in the studio and tune guitars in between takes or pull out amps and plug them in and whatever. And just kind of be like a fly on the wall in the control room while they were tracking. So I was able to be a part of a lot of really cool sessions, not playing, but just kind of like being there and meeting the people. And like, I think Tim Pierce came in. So Tim Pierce was the first call guy for Rob Cavallo. He was like a lot of sessions, and I think it might have been a Goo Goo Dolls thing that they were doing for like one of the Transformers movies. And so I was there, and Tim was there, and in that situation, it was a really cool hang because we would work all day, and then Rob would have his chef make dinner for us, so we would all eat dinner, like the band. Like I had dinner with My Chemical Romance and the Goo Goo Dolls and all these really cool bands at Rob Cavallo's house and Tim Pearson. So we would just like literally break bread after, midway through the session and just hang out. And, after that, I would like run into Tim at like the local restaurant because we both lived like in the Valley. And, we just exchanged numbers. And so I've been in contact with him ever since. And then it's funny, like I would run into him at the NAMM show in Anaheim once in a while. And then we both kind of started getting more into the YouTube thing around at the same time. So we had that to talk about. And so we've just been friends ever since then. And then the baked potato thing, when I first moved there, they would do every Monday night jam, I think, where it was kind of like all the local musicians would go, but it was mostly like the fusion guys. That was a really great guitar player he might have been from Dallas or maybe Houston, John Ziegler. Him and, the other guys in the band would host it. And so I would meet whoever would come through. Some of the local guys that were doing like the bigger tours would come and jam. So I would meet them and kind of make that hang. And after a while, I was like, I don't like fusion stuff anymore, but let me just go and have a potato and a beer.
Was there a starstruck moment for you where you met a hero, a guitar hero, or somebody you never expected, and we all have that moment where it's like, I don't know what I'm going to say to this person?
A starstruck moment while living in LA where I met Gene Simmons. There was a bar in Hollywood called the Sayers Club, which was at the time was like this really hip speakeasy that you had to enter through a hot dog like stand restaurant through the bathroom to get into this like really posh club.
Yeah.
And once a week they would do like a jam, not a jam night, but they would invite singers to come and sing covers, and then the backup band would just play, along with them. And I would cover for my friend a couple nights. And one night one singer was Sophie Simmons, and then the other singer was Nick Simmons. So both of Gene's kids were singing, these songs. I can't remember. I think Nick might have sang like a Black Keys song or something. I can't remember. But Gene and Shannon showed up. So here I am playing with his kids, and he's like on a couch, like right in front of me. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like a huge Kiss fan. And he, at the end of the gig, he came up to me and shook my hand. And he's like, you played Johnny B. Good, very good, very well. Which now that I think about it, I'm like, Back to the Future. Oh my God, I can't believe I played Johnny B. Good in front of Gene Simmons. Full circle.
Connected. Yeah, full circle.
But I that was one time where like I didn't know what to say. I was just like, oh, thank you.
All right, guitar geek time. Is there a bucket list guitar on RJ's list, like a vintage guitar or something? It's like, I've always wanted this. One day I'm going to have it. Or was it a Tyler or something like that?
The Tyler was a big one, yeah, for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I could say another Tyler, but...
We could all say another Tyler.
Yeah. I don't know if there is a bucket... You know what? There isn't today.
That's a great answer.
I really don't have, like, I'm not a huge vintage guitar person, even though I love playing them. I haven't really had an interest in collecting a lot of vintage guitars, although I should say, and I told this to lots of people, like, when it comes to vintage guitars, if I was to really get into them, I love old jazz boxes, like the big hollow body things. There's just something that I'm attracted to, like the old Gibsons. There's so many different models that really look really cool. So
like
I do
L5 and
like L5s, 150s, all that stuff. And I have two. I've got like a Barney Kessel from 1964, and then I bought an L5 from like 1940, which I love. And those two, like I would buy more of those if I was getting into vintage stuff, but I have no interest in like a 57 Strat or a 59 Les Paul. That's whatever. I think just like the jazz guitars, because they don't make anything comparable to like those anymore. With the Les Pauls, you can get a really nice custom shop Murphy Lab that, I've played real 59s and I own a Murphy Lab, and I can get the same vibe from a Murphy Lab than from a $500,000 Les Paul.
Oh, don't say that, RJ. The 59s had magic in them.
Oh, I know. There's something about them.
There's something about going into massive amounts of debt
Yeah.
I can hear on the record.
Exactly.
Um,
Okay, I thought of one. Maybe
Okay.
like one of the first Ibanez gems when they first came out. The green Loch Ness green one. That would be a dream guitar.
for me, it's always been one of those true Charvel San Dimas, like pre-production before it was import.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I started restoring a bunch of like Charvel 375s and 475s that obviously I grew up seeing in the store, and I really wanted one, couldn't afford it. And I was just so blown away with how well they were made. Like the fretboard was amazing, and I was just going, man, this is, you know.
Yeah. I have a USA made Charvel Jakey Lee that's like one of my favorite guitars. It just plays so good.
Yeah, big Charvel fan.
Love them.
What one piece of gear, non-guitar, can they not take from RJ if they took everything else out? Now, we can play with reality here. Obviously, if you don't have an amp, no one can hear you. But I just mean, is there one piece of gear that you've had maybe forever and you're just like, it doesn't matter what new thing comes out, this is staying in the studio, or this is staying with me?
That's a good one.
I just have to ask somebody that reviews gear, what's the one gear you won't part with?
Years ago, when I was still living in Florida, I bought a 60s Fender Bassman head for like $300. And to me, that was like the first tube amp that I ever owned that really was so simple, but there was some sort of magic to it where like I could plug in a Strat or a Les Paul to it, or I could plug it in with a 412 cab and crank it, and it sounded amazing. So that was the first tube amp to me that really, I almost compare every single amp that I own to that Bassman. Like, and a lot of people will say like a lot of Marshalls and whatever come from the Bassman circuit or that lineage. So there's just something like that's like the most bare bones amp that I really like. There's no reverb, there's no tremolo. It's literally just volume, treble, and bass, and pedal sound. Every single pedal sounds great through it. So that's one that's always gonna stick with me for sure.
If you were going to tell somebody who was wanting to do a YouTube channel, what have you learned over the years about YouTube and being a creator, and what's RJ's tips for the YouTube creators out there, specifically in music?
Well, every YouTuber will say you got to be consistent and you got to, upload if you can, frequently. People that specialize, like their YouTube channel is just about how to have a YouTube channel, So there's tons of tips on that. But for me, I learned as I went. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Learn as you go, basically. Yeah. I learned how to film, how to use a camera, how to edit, how to light things, and experimenting. So for me, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted my YouTube channel to look like and what it, to be about and all that stuff. But I'm still not a pro at what I'm doing. I just kind of do whatever I like. But as far as tips go, in our type of world, make sure your audio sounds as good as it can be.
Yeah.
No camera mics. Just get it all in the box and use real mics or whatever. Audio, and then even if you're only using like your iPhone, invest in like a basic lighting kit. Those are the two biggest things that make the biggest difference for like the least amount of money. Good audio and good lighting, because most everyone has a new iPhone and the cameras are great.
Was there a solo that was really impactful for you that either A, you had to learn and it was like, I got to conquer this, or is there one of those just Mount Everest guitar solos that it's like, I still can't play it, I've always wanted to play it, I've worked at it, it just can't? I feel like, to me, it's always one or the other. I feel like I had Mount Everest ones. There was a song by Megadeth called Victory where Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine go back and forth and play this monster of a solo. For me, it was like, I could never truly get it down. But now it's transitioned into ones that probably the most influential. It's not so much that they're difficult. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you the choice of either or, but is there one solo right there that was either that Mount Everest or impactful for RJ?
Well, right off the top of my head, there's definitely a solo, maybe two solos that are my Mount Everest currently. And the first one is Jeff Watson's solo in Don't Tell Me You Love Me, Night Ranger. So if you're not familiar with the song, Brad Gillis takes a solo, which I can do. And then Jeff Watson takes this really super, super fast kind of arpeggio type of thing. And I cannot for the life of me figure out how him or, the current guitar player, is it Kerry Kelly? I can't remember, but how they can play it that fast, that clean. And I struggle with it. Like I try to play it every day just to know. Like I know the notes, but I can't get it up to speed. And it's amazing how he does it. There's got to be a trick to what his picking or something. But that one, and then there's like a Steve Morse song called "Too Many Notes." And most of it is like getting it up to speed of the record. Like I know the notes that are being played. I can sort of play them, fast, but I cannot get it to the speed that it's really supposed to be at. So those are my Mount Everest songs, I guess.
Last question I'll ask you. You're around a lot of young guitarists that are coming up now. What is the future of the instrument in terms of who's playing? Because people always ask me, like, well, what do you think? Do you think guitar is an instrument that's on the rise? Do you think it's flat? Do you think it's declining? And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like every time where I turn, somebody else is picking up the guitar. What's RJ's kind of vision for the future of the instrument and people playing it? And what do you see in Nashville in terms of maybe stuff that I don't see, obviously, here in Omaha?
Well, I think there's a ton of great young guitar players spread across all the different genres, which I think is really cool. I haven't found a young guitar player that's doing like what we love, the Dan Huff stuff. Maybe I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't found them yet or her yet. But, there's so many great guitar players that are doing, the classic blues stuff, rock stuff, the new, metal, progressive, whatever, everything. So it's really refreshing to know that there's young people dipping into all the different styles still. Whereas there was a time where I felt like all the new guitar players just want to play, neo soul or play like John Mayer or play like, the metal gent stuff or whatever. But now I'm discovering more like Grace Bowers. She's a great, young, I think she's 17-year-old. She's really into like blues and classic rock. And so that's really refreshing to know that there's kids, basically, young people that are into the old stuff and different stuff.
You and I being pretty close in the same age, or at least in the same time frame. I forgot to ask, were you a big Guitar Magazine guy?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely had a subscription to Guitar Player from 1988 to like 96 for sure.
About the same time. Yeah,
and then, I would buy Guitar World and Guitar for the Practicing Musician.
Yep.
And then once Barnes and Noble started opening up and you would get the European guitar magazines, I was like, oh, let me spend $15 on this import magazine.
I just remember all the mail order stuff. Like if you wanted posters or something that was like you couldn't get in a music shop, or T-shirts or VHS tapes, like guitar training tapes, you had to do the mail order thing. So you'd wait like a month for Metal Method to show up. And like, it's so wild now that it's all on demand. But I just remember the anticipation of, well, this video is going to unlock my playing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was the same thing for everything, like skateboard magazines. Yeah. Everything was like slow and you'd have to wait a month for something to arrive. And
well, I tell my kids when they play video games, it's like, you guys can go jump on YouTube and watch a walkthrough of how to get out of this level. But like when the Nintendo came out and I was playing like Mario and you can't figure out how to make the jump, unless your buddy has a subscription to Nintendo Power, you're just figuring it out.
Oh yeah. Unless you hear something from somebody else at school. Like, this is the trick.
I can't land the plane in Top Gun. Help. I could geek out about guitars with you all day.
Yeah, it's been great.
Been meaning to get you on here for a long time, and huge fan, and just wanted to say keep up the amazing work. And I think you inspire more people than you think. Even with a massive following on YouTube, you're super influential for so many guitar players. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you, John.